brand strategy, marketing, lead flow, everything that matters when it comes to acquiring new customers and clients within your business. Marketing is such a key component. And I am so excited to share an episode of The Ownership Advantage here where I get to sit down with a fractional CMO, a master of marketing herself, Liz Papagni. So in this conversation, we get into several different tactics and things that you can actually use in your business for marketing. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Liz Papagni. Liz, thank you so much for being here. Excited to dig in, talk a little bit about marketing strategy, things like that. But for those that have not met you yet, newer to the audience, tell us a little bit about you. Give us your background. What has been kind of your experience in the marketing world and where are you at today?
Yeah, so I've been in marketing for, 25 plus years. I actually got a degree in marketing from college, believe it or not, which is kind of unusual that you're doing what you actually got a degree for. But for me, it's twofold. It's because I like psychology. I like to watch. Love people watching, and I like words. To me, one word can make a difference in terms of what you mean. Like if you say you could do it or you will do it, there's a totally different meaning, right? So, and really marketing is really about changing behavior on how people act, how to drive them to act. So for me, since I like psychology and writing and words, marketing was just a natural fit for me. 25 plus years later, worked in senior level positions on the client side. Then I went over to the advertising agency side, worked for advertising agencies, PR agencies, direct marketing agencies, and probably about 12 or 13 years ago, I opened up my own agency. And then a progression from there, I started doing fractional CMO work as part of that agency, and now that's all I do is exclusively for clients is do fractional CMO stuff. So lots of experience and lots of different approaches in terms of where my career has gone. So that's what I do, and that's where I am today.
It's amazing. I already took a few notes I'm excited to kind of dig into and ask some questions about, but let's dig into fractional CMO work for a minute. Especially, the fractional world seems to be gaining a little bit more traction today than it has, maybe in the last kind of 5 years or so.
Yeah.
But for those that haven't kind of caught on to the train of what fractional work looks like, give us a little bit more context on what does it mean to have a fractional CMO in place?
Yeah. So from a fractional perspective, in the last, I would say, one thing COVID did give us is that people could be fractional. They don't have to be in the office, right? So only one thing that helped businesses understand. But really, fractional is when a company really needs the high-level expertise and leadership within a specific discipline, whether it's marketing, sales, operations. There's lots of fractional types of, there's really everyone in the C-suite, and I'm seeing some CEO fractionals now, which is literally kind of interesting. But so what you do is you get all the intellectual property and the experience on the leadership, the leadership level to sit on your leadership team at the fraction of the cost and at the fraction of the time. So you get all the help that you need, but you're not paying a large salary for that, benefits and things like that, and you still can get what you need. So that's kind of the premise of fractionals. From a marketing perspective, I think as one of the departments internally in an organization, that's probably the one department that companies are used to outsourcing. And I say that because when they hire a lot of companies hire agencies, they're really outsourcing a marketing function, but that's more of an execution function, right? And a lot of the clients that I see within the clients that I work with, they'll have marketing individuals, but they're usually at the lower level, and they're doing tactics all day long, supporting departments, particularly the sales department, but they really don't have that thought leadership on their team that actually understands the marketing process, the marketing strategy and planning, and how that all fits into the puzzle in order to meet the business objectives of the company. So that's kind of what fractionals do. We are part of the team, but you're not paying us a big salary and benefits.
It's a really good kind of context of how that fits. And, in a lot of our work when it comes to working with primarily small businesses that haven't, graduated to the point where they have a full-time CMO in place yet, we've seen much of the same thing. There's a lot of, I kind of know some different functions within marketing to a degree. Maybe I'm not an expert in marketing yet as the business owner. Starting to outsource some of those specific functions. We're gonna have somebody that does paid ads, or I'm gonna have somebody that runs social for me, or does X, Y, or Z. But being able to then put everything back together strategically. And I know that's something that we talked about before jumping on is how do we start crafting that strategic focus for a business? So maybe kind of talk us through what that looks like. So if you work with somebody, what does it mean to be strategic in your marketing?
So I just want to back up just a little bit in terms of the fractional. I also think that since there's a lot of fractionals out there today, I think that you need to look for individuals that, and just like you are a business owner, I'm a business owner, been a business owner for almost 15 years now, and I think that we bring something even more special to the table. Because we run our own businesses, we may be helping those clients from a marketing perspective in that seat, but we can see other things and other gaps and holes throughout the organization because we are running our own companies. So we may be able to provide even more value because we've owned our own business, not only have the marketing experience, but the business owner experience to help the company in a broader aspect as well. So I want to make, because there's a little bit of distinction there. From a strategic perspective, so when I start working with a client, I have a proven process that I've developed over the years. And I really come in and I do one, before I bring the client on, we make sure that we meet, so I understand, what their problems are, and who they are, and making sure that we're both a fit, right? Because, even like an employee or anything like your friend or even your marriage, you need to make sure you're compatible. Because I'm I like the psychology and the people stuff, so I want to make sure we're compatible because certain people can work well together and certain people can't, right? So if that all is good, then I start working with them. I come in and I do a complete audit, right? And I mean a complete audit as in a business audit, looking at in terms of, what's their business plan, what are their products, what are their services, what markets are they in, what markets do they think they want to go in, do they want to launch a new product or do they want to launch a new service? And then kind of look at their competitive landscape, their market landscape. Do they have personas of their customers profiled, or is like who really are their customers? And you'd be surprised, a good majority of them think they know, but they really don't know. And then I usually do a survey, like a informal survey. I'll talk to all their employees or everyone on their C-suite, talk to their partners, talk to their customers, because I want to get a good feel for market perception, how are they viewed, what messages are they going out to the marketplace, and how does that fit within what they're actually saying about themselves? What do they look like? Is that in line with their business goals and their objectives? And then once I do that, I put that all together into a report and I provide my findings and recommendations in terms of where we need to start. Because I always say, if we don't know where we're going, how do we know how we're going to get there? So if I don't understand the complete market landscape, competitive landscape, and how they fit in and what they're doing, right or wrong, then we can't really do anything in marketing because we have to understand the bigger picture. And so once we talk about that, then majority of the time, not always, I'm reworking their customer profiles after that. I'm reworking their messaging and their positioning. I'm more than likely going to be looking at redoing some collateral. Probably more than not, I'm going to be refreshing their website because it's probably so old and dated and needs to be, because that is their face of us today. Anytime you do it, I do it too. When I hear of a company, what's the first thing I do? I go on, I search for them. Mm-hmm. And if I and my immediate first impression is going to be whatever news I see, right? Or whatever they're talking about, and I'm going to see their website, right? So most of the time we'll be reworking all those, maybe refreshing what they look like and things like that. Not always. But in the meantime, that doesn't mean all the work stops, right? So we have to have a long range strategy and goals, right? And then we got to keep things moving, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll do that, and so then once we have the foundation set, then we build the strategy in terms of how we're going to market the company, what we're going to say, what markets we're going to go in, what products are going to go in markets, and kind of build a brand hierarchy. Here's the corporation. So there's two types of companies. There's a house of brands and a branded house. I have to figure out which ones they are, right? So a branded house means that it's all about your company and your products really don't have a name, or your services don't have a name, they're just functions. But a house of brands is that you have like kind of like a Johnson and Johnson, right? Johnson and Johnson's the umbrella company, but each brand, like Skippy and all that, they all have their own brands. So what are we doing and how are we presenting those, right? So we got to figure out their company infrastructure, and because that's going to dictate how we're going to market, right? So
It's
once we
interesting.
know all that, we go in there and then we build the strategies behind that, and then we build the plan. And the goal is that our strategy is going to be based upon the target audiences that we're going to go after, and where those target audience look for information about what they want to buy, how they want to buy it, and the plan then comes last because that's the tactical plan. We only pick those channels to spend our money in where our target prospects are. That's it. If they're not on TikTok, we're not going to be on TikTok. Okay. So, and a lot of companies go, so it's kind of like, and then we'll saturate that market because I think like in an inverted triangle. Let's get to who we actually need to go to and let's saturate them in where they are. And then we kind of make our way out to broader based types of things if we need to. Sometimes we don't need to do that, right? And I think a key part of that plan is what are the metrics? It's all about the data, right? I'm kind of a data geek, so I kind of leverage the creative and the data because data doesn't lie. Data is going
Yeah.
to tell you exactly what is happening, how it's happening, and it's going to make not only give us data in terms of what our return on our our ad spend is or return on our marketing, but it's also going to show us our ROI as well, right?
Hmm.
So we just need to make sure that when we're doing that, we build all those metrics in. And metrics doesn't always mean I'm making a sale. Okay? There's lots of other metrics that marketing is based on to make sure we're doing the right thing at the right time in order to elicit the best response that we can. So that's kind of how I work with clients, how I come in, and how I methodically, even though marketing changes every day, right?
Hmm.
Algorithms change every day, especially when you're doing digital. So I'm a huge proponent of building a plan, but testing it until we find out one word can make a difference, one visual can make a difference in terms of how people respond or how much response we're getting. So there's always a testing period of time where we test, and then we put we put our foot on the gas, right? But we never stop testing because things change all the time. So
I really
that's
love
kind of
that.
how I work with clients. Yeah.
I, that is absolutely fantastic, and I'm glad I'm not the only like data person on this conversation.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I love leading by the data as well, and
Yep.
am very much aligned with the fact of let's focus on the things that work. Let's focus on where our target audience actually is. Let's build from there. We want a channel that's profitable before we start testing on 10 of them at once. So
Correct. Correct.
it
Yes.
absolutely amazing there. You had mentioned it's kind of surprising that some business owners or businesses think they know what their target audience is, but maybe that's not always the case. What's a good example of a target audience, or kind of how that would be described, versus a maybe bad example, or kind of some, I don't want to call them horror stories, but some not as great ones that you've heard of in the past?
Yeah. So I think that well, I always get, well, it's how do you know who their clients? Oh, I just know. I'm like, okay, right. But I think the best way to help clients do that is data. If they data is who are your best customers? I want to know who your best customers are. Let's pull some data from your CRM or your ERP, wherever it resides. Sometimes it doesn't reside anywhere. Sometimes it resides in disparate places. But let's look at who they are. And I just don't mean of revenue, I mean the lifetime value of that customer, right? So not only what the revenues is, but how many times have they bought from you? How frequently do they buy from you, right? So, and putting those numbers, and that could be really easily done just pulling it out of a system just by queries. And hopefully they have the ability to do queries. Well, sometimes they don't, but anyway. But and let's like dissect them. And most of the time, people focus on the functional part of who their target is, like their revenue is 5,000, they have 50 employees, they're in this geographical reach. That's great. That's demographic, but what about the psychographic stuff, right? What are they thinking? Like some instances, like it's not just it's also not the op function, but it's the emotional component. A lot of the clients don't understand the emotional side of their clients, like in terms of where are they in their life cycle. Are they young and have kids? Because that's going to dictate some behavior at work, right? Or how they make decisions. Or are they, older, or even the generations. Now we have Z, and I think what's the other one? Alpha now. So now we have Alpha that's born, Z, millennial, Xers, and baby boomers all in the workforce all at one time. Well, actually, no, the Zs are not in the workforce; they're younger now. But definitely what did I say? The ones after millennials. My kids are those.
Millennials, X's, and boomers, definitely. Yeah.
So you have 4 generations now in the workforce. So depending upon where they are, and sometimes older millennials are actually acting like Xers now because they have children and families, and they're in a different stage of life. So when we put together personas, we not just have to look at the functional, but we have to look at the personal side, where are they in their life cycle, or how did they grow up, and because that's going to dictate how they make decisions, right? And it's going to dictate how they message to them. Like the young now, they don't even email, okay? So that's all they are, is online. They text like the Dickens, right? So if we're targeting them, we can't be sending them emails, right? We can't. It's all about today. It's even more about authenticity. It's all about being real, because they're actually growing up in the AI generation, where there's a lot of things that can be created that aren't actually real, right? So I think that's where where companies fall down, is all that emotional peripheral stuff, but that has a really key bearing on how they're going to make decisions and how we message to them. So it's like when people market products, they want to scream the products and features, scream the product and features. Well, guess what? Apple didn't get where they were by screaming product and features. They developed a lifestyle brand. It's a status symbol. It's a lifestyle. Why do they think there's so much lines when the new iPhone comes out? Yeah, it's got these great features. Half the people don't even use those features. Well, I don't use a lot of them. I just use it for email and calling. But anyway, but they developed a lifestyle. People want to have it because of emotional stuff, not just for the functional stuff. So that's what I see a lot, where they don't understand the other side. I get a lot of, revenue, they have this many employees, they're in this type of industry. That's great. But why are they buying from us, right? So that's what I see a lot of.
I really, really love that. And as you kind of talk through this, I think it's becoming a little bit easier when you mention the psychology side of things.
Yeah.
And behavior, emotions, all of that kind of stuff really starting to play a role. It's how do people make decisions? How do they think? So if we're having a conversation of a target market that is revenue based and number of team members and industry and things like that, being able to ask the question, it's great. What makes them at that level? What are the things that they're doing? How does their lifestyle look because they're at that level? How are they spending their time? Like, how do we get deeper into those conversations? Because I have to imagine that's going to lead to a much better understanding of where can we get in front of them? Where whether it's online or offline, where are they spending that time that then we can go and place an ad, have a conversation, all the different ways that we can
there's a couple of companies that put together like buckets of people, right, with emotional descriptors. I can't think of one offhand, but like if you're affluent, right? If you're affluent, that there's going to be certain things, not everybody, but there's certain things that are going to be really high in travel, really high in eating out, or entertainment, right? Those are characteristics or lifestyles now that's not always perfect, right? It's a guide. It's not always perfect, but there's things that I can't think of it right now, but they put like people in like lifestyle buckets, and what would they possibly be interested in or look at and do, and that kind of stuff. That's all part of the data segmentation. You can use data companies that can pull those profiles for you as well, right? So, but I get a lot of demographics or firmographics, because demographics consumer, firmographic is business. I don't get a lot of psychographics.
When I'd love to have a bit of a conversation on marketing, sales, connection of those two things together within a business, but maybe this a good segue into this is understanding how do we ask more questions to learn more about either our current customers or the prospects that we're having conversations with? Maybe we don't get a sale, but what are the little data points that we want to capture so we have a better understanding of how we can market to them in the future? Mm-hmm. And I have to imagine there's a little bit of crossover from marketing and sales, but tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on marketing, sales, and how important it is that they kind of work together.
Yeah. So from your perspective between marketing and sales, it is all about what questions you ask and how you ask the questions, because you're gathering data to be more targeted. However, marketing and sales are not the same thing. They're not. I always laugh when I was on the client side when I was younger, right? And there would be somebody that was in charge, like the senior level person when I was younger, and if they were ever the director or VP of sales and marketing, that was always the death to the marketer. Because most of the time they're salespeople that got the marketing department under them, but they really don't understand what they do and the value. So more than likely, they're just supporting the sales department by making collateral and all that kind of stuff. They need that, but so the difference between marketing and sales is kind of like, I wish I had my pyramid, I could have showed it, but they have different roles. So marketing is the individuals that build the awareness, the perception of the company. They build the top of the funnel, meaning they get people interested, overall. And then once they build the right perception of the company in the marketplace, the right messaging, right? We also help build the target personas that we just talked about in length, because that not only helps us market to those people, that it actually helps the sales department understand who they're going after, right? So we kind of build the framework, right, of the company, the brand, the target audience, and then once we, through our plans and our tactics, understand that when we go to those channels and tactics that we only need to get to those people, we gauge the interest. We get people interested. We get people warm in that cycle. So then once we get them in the cycle, we have to keep following and nurturing them through the buyer's journey. So when they're ready to buy, they're going to buy from us, right? And as we do that, that data is shared with sales so they can be more effective on calling on the right people, right? So the main difference between us is that we build to the top of the funnel. We make it easier for their job. We make it easier for them. So when they're out talking to people, they already know who the company is and what they stand for, which makes it easier for them to get to the proposal stage. They give them a proposal and they close the deal. Mm. We set it up and they close, if that's the best way I can put it, right? Mm-hmm. Where we come together is sharing all that data, sharing all, that. And then sales also can reciprocate, because when they actually are talking to a prospect and they're asking the right questions, like, what are you looking at doing? What are your challenges right now? Because we really want to find out what their pain points are, right? We do that on the marketing side too when we build our personas, right? But that always needs to be updated and refreshed on a regular basis. So if the salespeople ask the similar types of questions when they're prospecting, that gives us fresh data and we move it over, right? So we can continue to hone that. So a sales job is to find out what they're trying to do, what their pain points are, how does our product or service solve those pain points, and why should they come to us? That's where the brand, the perception, all of our 5-star reviews on Google, all of our certifications and all that marketing helps take care of. It also helps the sales, right? So we have distinct roles. We build, they close, right? But we all come together and intersect, in all those points. But we definitely have a separate role on that leadership team to make sure. And what are both of us looking to do? We're looking to grow the company. We're making sure that we are meeting the business objectives through our activities, and then we're also looking to get more customers and get more revenue. We both have the same goal. We just have the different roles in getting to that goal.
I really like that. You had mentioned one of the places that marketing and sales comes together is the data points, and being able to share across the marketing and sales spectrum. As I kind of thought about this in the last couple of years and doing some marketing on our side and really focused on the sales too, and needing to kind of focus both sides, that feedback loop between marketing and sales, both marketing giving feedback to sales and sales giving feedback to marketing, the tighter that feedback, that's where I saw probably the biggest jump in success with both marketing and sales. I frankly speaking, I've hired and fired a ton of marketing agencies in the past that there wasn't enough connection point, and frankly it was I didn't know how to manage the
because it's
relationship
it's tactically driven. It's not strategic, and I'm not saying every agency's like that, because when I had my agent, it was very strategic, because that's my zone of genius, right? And that's why we were successful. But majority are very tactical, which is fine. Someone has to execute, right?
Yeah.
But they're focused more on the execution, because frankly, that's where their revenue comes from.
Yeah. It's one thing I found was really important, and this is to say, I think there's been a fall off between sharing of the data points. I talked to a lot of businesses that are like, oh, marketing is not working, things like that. But they get to later points in the sales, and they never send that information back to marketing to say, these are the leads that we're getting. Here's what's actually happening with them. Here's the things that we're finding out. If you just gave that information back to marketing, then there can be continued refinement and
let me tell you, the best way to do that is you need a CRM system. And it does not have to be an expense. There are free ones out there that you can, or lower level ones of the big ones, right? You don't have to spend a lot of money on it. It's no longer like Goldmine and what are all this and Act and all that and Salesforce. It's about, Salesforce is just for huge companies, but it's not just having sales, having a place for them to keep track of their leads and their, are they warm, hot, wherever they came from, and their follow up. All that data needs to be in a CRM system where it's not just the leads come in, then they change to prospects and they change to customers. But marketing also is in that CRM where we're managing all of our campaigns through there, and we're tagging all of our records to say this is where this person came from and this is where they went in their journey. So when somebody purchases a product or a service, we can look back in terms of where they found us, so we can calculate ROI. So a lot of companies, if you're like in trade, still have customers in trade, like in the trades industry, which I do have a fair amount of clients in there. They still do a lot of trade shows, believe it or not, right? But that's a sales thing. Only salespeople go, right? And it's like, okay, where are the leads? Where the leads did you get? We got to get them in the CRM. We got to flag them that we got them from that particular show. And then when we close it, we need to, it's like I said, I'm a numbers person, but it's really not that hard if you have a good CRM and everybody's playing well together and putting in their info. I mean, sales is obviously notorious for not putting the information in, but they don't have to. That's why we have inside salespeople that help them and do their administrative work, right? So it's not hard, and it doesn't have to be expensive. And it's so valuable, so valuable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I know, we've had several conversations on we got to get the data in. If you got a lead, you got different things, like put it into the CRM so we can see what's happening and what's happening downstream. And when we can translate that for those that are hardcore into sales, don't want anything to do with marketing, the more that we can have that data, the more successful they're going to be as
there's scanners. They can scan their cards in. They don't have to put it in. There's scanners today. The CRMs now have mobile apps where as soon as you meet with somebody, you could just put that information in, put it right into the mobile app. I mean, we've made it simple and easy now to put in that data. It's not like when I started a long time ago where, anyway, we had to data entry everything, right? But so it's easy and simple. You just have to have a system in place. And like I said, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's so many ways to get started on that process. Well, I want to pivot for a second. There's a couple of topics I think would be fun for us to dig into. I kind of want to get your thoughts on. So you had mentioned earlier that what's one of the first things we do when we hear about a business or something else like that? We go in and we search for them and we see all the different things that pop up. Well, I'm wondering how personal brands fit into this, because I'm seeing more and more that if you meet somebody at a networking event or a trade show or something else like that, it's not just searching the business, but it's searching the actual person themselves. How does that play into the strategic plan for a business, whether you've got a team of 5 to 10 people or you've got a much larger team of people out there, things like that. How do you see that playing into the overall strategic vision?
Yeah, so from a personal perspective, it's just a different. I mean, so let's say we have the leadership team at a company, right? And if the business is owned by a business owner, right, whether it's public or private, or whether the CEO, that you need to make sure that whatever the company that you're with, that when you're talking about yourself, right, you need to make sure that your value. I mean, I would say majority of people go to work for companies that share the same values that they do, and they love what they do, and that's why they went to that company, right? You would hope, right? So, personal brand is really building a brand for yourself, right? But that has to always make sure that it relates to where you are, especially if you are the business owner, if that makes sense, right? You can't be like X and Y. You got to kind of be connected. But from a personal brand, that's a whole different strategy and approach depending upon what you want to do. I think the best thing to think about it is not as a personal brand, but you want to become a thought leader in your industry, right? Most of the time, right?
How do you define the difference between personal brand and thought leader?
I think personal brand is more who you are and what you stand for, and it doesn't, and what you do as a, that can, like philanthropy can come into that and all that kind of stuff, right? So, which is good, and it's about you and who you are, but most of the time you're in an industry that you love, right? Especially if you're the business owner and you're passionate about it. That means you also want to be a thought leader in that industry, right? So you can kind of talk about yourself, but you also want it. That's where the industry comes in. That's where who you work for and what you do comes in. Because not only is it about John Doe and who is he and what he loves to do, and he's got a family and he gives to this and that. That's great. That's the fluffy, emotional stuff. But the best way to build a personal brand is also to build thought leadership in a particular thing of what you do and what your industry in. And the best way to do that is you just got to start creating content, right? Write a book, which I wrote a book too, about 5 years ago. Write a book, start looking at speaking, white papers, ebooks. So you are the expert in that field. So when someone's looking for that, they're going to come to you. And then what happens is if they know who you are and that's the industry that you're in and that's the type of company, and people love you over here because you're giving them content, you're educating them, they see you speaking, that not only is going to help build your personal brand or your identity and thought leadership, that also is going to help your company, right? The worst thing somebody could do is try to build their personal brand and thought leadership in an industry that has nothing to do with the company that they're a CEO of or they own their business. That's a huge disconnect, right? So I think personal branding is more on the touchy-feely, and then the thought leadership's more, it's kind of like data and science, right? I mean, that kind of stuff. So this is more of the functional, and this is more of the emotional, right? Personal's emotional, thought leadership's functional. And I think in order to do that successfully, you need to have both. So I think those words are kind of interchangeable, right? But for me as a marketer, as I said, I like words, and words mean something. When I think thought leadership, I'm like, ooh, they know a lot about that industry. Personal brand, oh, they're a good person and they give to this and that, but they got to kind of come together.
Nice. I really like that kind of breakdown of how that can look as a business strategically. So we're thinking different marketing stuff. We're thinking or seeing out there that thought leadership, personal branding, both of those things are much more prevalent today than they have been probably ever in the past. Is there a time when it makes sense as a business to think about who do we bring on the team that has maybe a particular following or has some thought leadership that might be an asset for the team overall if we can direct them towards us? Does that become part of the plan, or have you seen anything like that in the work that you've done?
Normally I see it's more of the CEO or the owner that is at that personal brand expert, right? However, that doesn't mean that someone else on your leadership team can be that. And if they are, then I think they need to be within their function, right? Because unless they have aspirations to leave or aspirations to own their own company, right? But the whole thing about me is authenticity, right? In marketing, you have to be authentic. So people see through a lot of stuff, right? So if you have the C level and the CEO and he's got a personal brand and he's building his thought leadership within that industry that he has, and then you have somebody else on his team, usually at the leadership team level, usually at a more senior level, because in order to build that kind of thing, you got to have a lot of experience. If they're not in lock and step with them in terms of they want to do their thought leadership, and their thought leadership is going to focus more on like financial. If they're the CFO, it's going to be more financial, but within that industry, right? If they start moving outside of that, then it's kind of like, well, I can see you want to do that because you want to educate people, you want to be a resource and that types of stuff. You just have to be really careful that you don't make conflict when you do that, because it might have conflict internally, as well as some people might say, that's interesting, I wonder what's going on at that company, because this individual is like kind of moving away. Now keep in mind, I'm a marketer, I probably see stuff that no other people don't see, but I find that really, it's like because I remember I'm a people watcher, right? So you just need to be really careful with that. So what we always say, especially with LinkedIn, is when all your employees, everyone's probably on LinkedIn now, right? And they're going to say that they work for your company. We just need to make sure that we create templates, not only for the C level, but for every worker that is going to be on LinkedIn, and they have to follow the same thing. They have to talk about the company the same way. They have to present themselves the same way, because their brand or their perception is going to affect the overall company. So when we work with clients, we just make sure that we have a template in place in terms of, if you're going to have something on LinkedIn, you're going to talk about the company, this is what you're going to say. This is how it's going to be represented. This is how you're going to look. It's about the company, right? So, and you're going to have in your header, you're going to have the company emblem, and you're going to have your picture this way. You know what I mean? We can only dictate so much, but that's a big ask, to ask employees that we would like you to do this. We can't, you can't dictate that kind of stuff, but that's the way you also keep your brand intact. And one voice, one message. That's the whole thing about that. So
it's not, for those that are listening, they're like, I don't know about that. It's really not a new thing for businesses to give some guidelines on what can and can't be said.
We can't force, and we can't say you have to, but we have to have some guidelines.
Yeah. So speaking of authenticity, is AI going to take over the world and take over marketing?
No, it is not. Let's look back in, when did the internet start? I can't even remember. So let's say 20 years ago, it became more prevalent. 20, 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So when this all came out, that was probably about 20 years ago, because I remember everyone's like, oh my God, social media. What was the first one? Not Squarespace. What was it?
There was MySpace before
MySpace,
Facebook.
Yeah, right?
Yep.
So all this stuff started coming about the internet and social media and all this kind of stuff and data, and everyone started talking about it. It was everywhere, and everybody had to be on it, and Web 2.0 and all this. I remember 1999, believe it or not. Everything's going to crash, right? But and everybody got on the bandwagon, and they're thinking, oh my God, all this other stuff's going to go away. TV's going to go away. Commercials are going to go away. Radio's going to go away. Billboards are going to go away. Direct mail is going to go away. No, it didn't. It did not go away. Digital is powerful. Don't get me wrong. We do tons of digital. But when I'm working with other clients that are like trade shows still work. Direct mail is making a huge insurgence because nobody gets it anymore. No, there's no tactical, touchy-feely stuff anymore. It's making a comeback, right? So I say to AI, great, advancement's great, innovation's great, but guess what? It's going to just be another tool in the marketer's toolbox. Yes, it's going to automate some stuff, which is great. Yes, it's going to do some other things, right? Faster, quicker, great. But there's a human component. There's always going to be a human component because marketing is about function and emotion. And AI, you can create all this stuff, you can make these things, you can make it look real, but I'm going to tell you, the younger generation knows fakeness, and you're going to, that's not good. Like, for instance, I'll give you some examples. Chat GBT and then Justin, or is it Justin, Jason, or whatever, I don't know, those people that write copy, the computers that write copy. You can read it and you can know that it's coming from Chat GBT. You know why? Because it's a bunch of facts put into proper grammar with no feeling, no emotion, no brand voice. I think right now it's a great research tool, and maybe some people have perfected it where it can now bring emotion into it. Great. But humans are selling to humans. And we have to have humility, and we have to have emotion, and it's going to be a great tool, but it's not going to replace anything.
I'm really glad that you said that, because I'm 100% aligned. I don't think
I'm sure we're going to get like lots of comments and say yes, blah, 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 blah. But you know what?
Please, yeah, give as many comments as possible, because it's great to have some conversation.
Innovation is great. Innovation is great. We wouldn't have all the data today if there wasn't innovation, right? Mm-hmm. We wouldn't be able to get really granular who our target is. It's awesome, but we use that data for things. It didn't replace anything, right? It helped us. It helped us do more. It didn't replace us. So SEO is still like the Wild West a little bit still, right? But I know it's everything. I get the question all the time. What about AI? And I think, oh my gosh, the question again, right? Not that I like innovation. It's just I've seen a lot of changes over the last 25 years, especially in marketing. And we got to be careful that we don't all jump on the bandwagon and forget about all the stuff that has worked in the past that can still work today.
I think it's probably a really good reminder in most things in life that if you go back to the actual fundamentals, everything else is built upon that. Yeah. The marketing and using AI and things like that still comes back to the base fundamentals of what has always worked before, which, to your earlier point, it's how people buy, it's how they think, it's their behaviors, it's where do they hang out. Like, none of that has changed.
No.
Other than we're just shifting focus and having some different tools to leverage. Yeah. Speaking of the authenticity piece, I was having a conversation with a colleague a week or two ago, and we were talking about AI video and this crazy stuff that's coming up, and speak of authenticity, and I think one thing that at least I think is going to be really important is the mix between online conversations like we're doing here and in-person stuff. Being able to walk out and someone say, hey, I've seen your stuff before, but I'm excited to actually have this conversation with you personally, and really merge together the digital world with this local in-person face-to-face stuff.
I think the art of face-to-face, we're losing it a little bit, right? So, but I will say that I have noticed probably in the last year or so is because of all of it's hard for people to believe sometimes what they see now, right? Is it real or is it not real, right? And the more we get into the more technology, I think that's going to be a little bit more prevalent, right? And being in front of a screen all day is not necessarily good either, right? So I think that more people are craving face-to-face and personal stuff, right? I've kind of seen in the last year or so, after we kind of got over the COVID thing, even just with COVID, people were so closed in and they were craving personal connections so bad, right? So I think we've probably learned that it can't all be digital. It can't all be on a computer and all that kind of stuff. Now that's obviously helped, but I think getting business done, unless you're e-commerce, right? The art of face-to-face, I think, is coming back. I think more people are meeting now and just craving that. I think that's why you'll see a lot of growth in a lot of like like networking groups and things like that. There's a bigger insurgence now of people becoming members because people want to get together for lunch. People want to get together for breakfast. People want to start sharing stuff so much, because when you're doing things digitally or things are digitally enhanced, you can't get that interaction back and forth. Like if somebody says something, you ask that question, or it's like people want to use their brains. I know, is that really, I mean, that's so fundamental, right? But people want to have that dialogue and change and talk, and because you never know where a conversation is going to go when you're talking in person, because ideas just pop up, right? So I do agree that technology has its place, and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying innovation's bad. But if we lose the realism and we lose the personal human connection, we're going to lose a lot.
Yeah. Again, going back to like core fundamentals, just because the online operating systems can change in a matter of hours, human psychology doesn't change that fast. It takes generations to change. And, humans still want to interact with other humans. That's how we're wired to be as individuals. So thinking of behavior and things like that, being able to bring it all the way back. And I would agree, face-to-face, actual human connection, things like that is still going to matter today, regardless of what technological advances continue to come our way.
Yeah. And I will say, if you know your target personas really well, you will know how that individual prefers to be communicated with. I'm going to tell you, anybody that's like 18 and above or younger, or like, the Gen Zs, oh my God, texting is like crazy, right? They have their own language, right? However, that doesn't mean they don't pick up their phone. It doesn't mean they don't have meetings. But when you're communicating and know your personas, that is one key thing you need to know, is what is their preferred means of communication, because that's how you're going to get their attention.
Yeah, that's really important. So Liz, I want to be respectful of the time that we have. Before we get into kind of our final wrap up here, for the audience, if there's one marketing thing that you could leave them with today, what's one thing that you would want to leave with the audience?
Say that we talked about a couple of those things already, right? Like marketing's not sales, and it's not just about the function, it's also about the emotion. But I would also say that marketing is one of the key aspects of your company where you could really, they're kind of like how financials, the lifeblood of the company, because it gives us money. Marketing is a huge emotional component of your company that is living and breathing, and it really enables everyone to understand who you are, what you do, why you do it, and why someone needs to buy from you. That's what marketing does for your company. It actually is, it's the face of your company to your prospects.
I would agree with that. Liz, how can the audience get a hold of you? They want to start a conversation, want to learn more about what y'all do and how that might plug into their business. Where can we advise them to go for some more information?
Okay, well, I'll give you my telephone number first, because I like to talk live, right? But anyway, so my telephone number is 714-595-0963. I'm in San Antonio, Texas, not in Southern California, but that's where I was for 20 years. That's why my number is extension 714. Or they can email me at lpapagni@mycmonow.com. Or they can check us out on our website at mycmo.com. mycmonow.com, excuse me. So,
beautiful.
Yep.
I love it. Make sure that all of that is linked in the comments and everything below. Liz, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. I highly enjoyed it. Great conversation. Thanks, Tanner. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Bye-bye.